The assignment landed on my desk a week before Halloween, and I remember thinking it was a puff piece dressed up as real reporting. 4 missing people in a Montana town of 600, spread across 18 months. No bodies, no arrests. Whatever pattern the state police had, they weren't sharing. My editor, a guy I'll just call R, had been chasing this story on and off since spring, and he wanted someone on the ground. I got on a plane to Bozeman and drove north in a rental Corolla, up past Great Falls, then west on a 2-lane that lost its shoulder about 40 miles out. The town sat in a bowl between 2 ridges. 1 gas station, 1 diner, 1 bar with a hand-painted sign, and a motel that had been closed since 2019 according to a piece of paper taped to the door. I ended up renting a room from a woman named Carol, who ran a bed and breakfast out of what looked like a converted ranch house. $90 a night, cash preferred, no questions about who I was or what I was doing there. That was the first thing I liked about the place. Felt like the kind of town that minded its own business. I dropped my bag, took a shower, and drove into what passed for downtown to grab dinner before the diner closed at 8. The diner was called Sue's, though the woman working the counter was named Diane. There were 3 other people inside. I sat at the counter and ordered coffee and a burger and asked casually if she'd been in town long. She said 41 years. I told her I was working on a story about the missing people, thinking that would either open her up or shut her down. She said, "You'd be the one from the magazine. Sit tight, I'll bring you the ketchup." I asked her how she knew that. She just smiled and walked off. I sat there with my coffee going cold, running through the list of people who could have told her. Nobody. I hadn't given Carol my last name at check-in. I'd paid cash. I hadn't spoken to a single other person in this town. My plates were Colorado, from the rental. R hadn't called ahead because there was no one to call ahead to. I'd made a point of not announcing myself because I wanted honest first reactions. I told myself she'd probably seen a stringer come through the previous week and made a guess. Reporters look like reporters. Fine. I finished the burger, left a 20 on the counter, and drove back to the B&B. That night I sat on the edge of the bed and made a list of who to talk to the next morning. The missing were a 19-year-old named Owen, a woman in her 30s named Melissa, a retired schoolteacher everybody called Mr. Pat, and a truck driver whose name in the state's report was Kyle. I had addresses for the families of 3 of them. Owen's mother lived in a double wide on a dirt spur off the main road. I knocked at 9 in the morning. She was probably 50, in a sweatshirt with a wolf on it, and she opened the door about 2 inches with the chain still on. I told her what I was doing there. I said I was sorry to bother her. I asked if she'd be willing to talk about her son. She said, "Your editor already asked us in April." R, same magazine. We told him we don't want to be in it. I stood there on that porch trying to keep my face neutral. R had never come to this town. I knew that for a fact, because I'd sat in his office 2 weeks earlier and he'd said, verbatim, that he'd been running the whole thing by phone and email because he couldn't get travel approved. He didn't even own a car. He hadn't been west of Chicago in 6 years. I said, "You're sure it was him, R?" She said his full first and last name, his middle initial. She said he'd worn a green jacket. I thanked her and walked back to the Corolla. I sat in the driver's seat with the door open and my feet on the dirt, and I looked at my phone. No signal, of course. Now look, there are a lot of ways to explain something like this if you want to explain it. Small towns talk. Somebody in the state police office could have leaked a name, a previous reporter could have dropped R's name in conversation, and it got attached to a face nobody had actually seen. People confuse things. Grief does weird things to memory. I went to the 3rd address anyway because that's the job. The 3rd address was for Mr. Pat's sister, who lived on the north end of town in a little blue house with a wind chime made out of forks. She was expecting me, which by that point I should have found funny but didn't. She had coffee ready. She sat me down at her kitchen table, put a mug in front of me, and said, "You came in from the east, didn't you? Up through Great Falls." I said yes. She said, "The 87 to the 200, then the county road." "You would have passed the church with the blue roof around 6 last night." I had. I remembered the church because it was the only building I'd seen for 20 minutes. I asked her how she knew that. She looked at me over her glasses, like I'd asked something rude, and said, "Honey, we all know." She said it kindly, like she was letting me in on something everyone else had already worked out. I asked her who "we" was, and she said the town. I asked what she meant by "no," and she said she'd said too much already, and would I like a piece of coffee cake. I didn't drink the coffee, I didn't eat the cake. I asked her 3 or 4 more questions about her brother, wrote down what she said in a notebook I could barely hold steady, and I left. I got in the Corolla and I drove. I want to be honest about this part because I've had 2 years to think about it. I did not run, I didn't peel out of a driveway. I drove the speed limit and I stopped at the 1 stop sign and I nodded at a man in a Ford who nodded back. But I also did not go back to the B&B. My bag was still there. Toothbrush, charger, a paperback I'd been reading on the plane. I left it and I drove east until I had cell signal, and then I called R from a pullout outside a town called Stanford. He picked up on the second ring. I told him what had happened. Diane at the diner, Owen's mother, the sister, and the route through Great Falls. There was a long pause on his end. Then he said, "Come home. Write it from the phone. Don't go back for the bag." I said, "Why?" He said, "Just come home." I drove straight through to Bozeman, dropped the rental, and sat in the airport for 6 hours because the next flight wasn't till morning. I ate a bad sandwich and watched a family argue about whether their dog was going to be okay in the cargo hold. I remember that dog very clearly, a little terrier. I remember it because it was the only thing in the airport that felt normal. When I got home, I did what R told me. I wrote the piece by phone, called the state police, called 2 of the families a second time, called a folklorist at the University of Montana who was willing to talk on background. It was a fine piece, not my best. It ran in December. 2 weeks after it ran, R forwarded me an email from a security researcher he'd worked with on an unrelated story the year before. The guy had been going through a data dump that had surfaced on a forum in September, a private database, no clear owner, being quietly sold and resold. It included home addresses, phone numbers, travel bookings, and known professional contacts for about 400 journalists in the US and Canada. The list skewed heavily toward reporters who'd worked missing persons cases, cult stories, and rural crime. My name was on it, R.S name was on it, so were 9 other people I recognized by byline. The researcher couldn't tell us who had assembled the database. He couldn't tell us who had bought it. He said the data was clean, meaning well organized, meaning whoever put it together had been at it for a while. He said the buyers were probably not one entity. He said the word probably a lot. I asked him if there was any way to know who in that Montana town had access to it. He said no, that wasn't how these things worked. Anyone with $200 and the right forum login could have pulled my file. A cop, a retired cop, somebody's cousin who worked IT in Billings. A guy at the diner whose brother-in-law forwarded him a spreadsheet as a favor. Any of them, all of them. That was the part that finally got to me. Not that someone had watched me, that the watching was ordinary, that it could be passed around a town of 600 like a recipe. I never went back for the bag. I assumed Carol threw it out or kept it. She never called the number I'd written down at check-in, which I'd made up on the spot anyway. R asked me once, a few months later, why I didn't go back and do a follow-up on the database angle. Big story, in theory. Who's collecting reporters? Who's buying? Why the missing persons beat specifically? It was the kind of piece he usually would have pushed hard. I told him there's nothing there worth it. He didn't ask again. I worked nights at one of the older branches of the Boston Public Library system. Not the main building on Copley Square, one of the smaller ones tucked into a neighborhood off Huntington Avenue, the kind of place with wood shelves and a boiler that clangs every 20 minutes. My shift starts after the last patron leaves and ends before the morning staff comes in. I sort returns, reshelve the trickier reference stuff, and mostly I work on the backlog for the special collection. That's what they call the old stock nobody's touched since the 70s. Books nobody borrows, cards nobody fills out anymore, whole shelves of forgotten circulation history. The library switched to a full digital system in 2004. Before that, everything was manual. Little cardstock pockets glued inside the back cover, a slip with the due date, a separate card that stayed at the desk with every borrower's number and date stamp. When they moved to the computer, they didn't throw the old cards away. They boxed them up and shoved them into the basement archive. My job in November 2021, part of a small grant-funded project, was to go through those boxes, one by one, and cross-reference the old cards against the digitized catalog. Boring, quiet work, perfect for someone like me, who likes libraries more than people. The basement smelled like paper that had gone slightly damp and dried back out too many times. There was a metal desk down there with a green banker's lamp on it. That's where I worked. The rest of the room was lit by a single overhead fluorescent tube that buzzed if you stood too still for too long. I'd been at it 3 weeks when I pulled the card. It was in a box labeled 1960s Fiction, Reprocess. I remember because I'd just come back from a cigarette break outside on Huntington, and my fingers were still cold enough to fumble the paperclip off the stack. The card was for a novel I hadn't heard of, some small-run American book from the 50s. Green ink on the borrower line. That was unusual. Most cards were stamped in black or purple. The first date was March 1962. Reader number 4471. I flipped the card over. The dates kept going. Same number, same green ink signature, over and over. Not messy, not big or looping. Just neat, patient entries, the way someone writes when they're not really thinking about it, when it's routine. 1963, 1964, twice in 1965, once in 1967, skipped 68 and 69, back in 1970, then 71, 72, twice in 73. The card was full on the back. I looked for a second card behind it in the same pocket, and there was one, then a third. 3 cards stapled together at the corner, all with the same reader number, all with the same green pen. The last stamp on the third card was April 2019, 57 years. I sat there with the cards in my hand for a while. The tube buzzed. I could hear the boiler kick on upstairs and the pipes in the wall behind the desk start their slow ticking. I want to be clear about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't dread. It was closer to the feeling you get when you find an old photograph in a coat pocket and realize you've been carrying it around for months without knowing. A quiet kind of surprise. Something ordinary that had been sitting in a box in a basement in Boston for decades, waiting for someone to notice. I checked the reader number against the digitized system. Our old member records were incomplete, but 4471 was in there. A name attached. I won't write it here for reasons that will make sense in a minute. Let's just say it was a woman's name, older sounding, the kind of name you don't hear on anyone under 70. She'd registered in 1961, when she would have been 31, according to the birth year on her file. Address in Jamaica Plain. She kept that same address her whole life. I did what any curious person would do. I looked her up. Her obituary was from October 2019, in a local paper. Short one. Lived in the same JP apartment for over 60 years. Worked as a bookkeeper for a shipping company that had gone under in the 90s. Never married. No children mentioned. A niece somewhere in New Hampshire. That was the whole life, at least the part strangers were told about. The last stamp on her card was 6 months before she died. I put the cards down and looked at the title again. It wasn't a famous book, not a classic. A quiet novel about a woman working in a hotel in New England, published in 1954, out of print by 1970. Our copy was probably one of the only ones left in the city. I decided to find it. The special collection stacks are on the 3rd floor, closed to the public. I took the service elevator up and walked the row until I hit the right call number. The stacks up there smelled different from the basement. Drier, more like old cloth. My footsteps sounded loud because the carpet had been pulled up during a renovation and never replaced, so it was just concrete under my shoes. The book was on the shelf where it was supposed to be. I almost missed it. Thin, cloth-bound, faded green, leaning slightly against its neighbor because the shelf wasn't full. The spine was cracked and retaped. Someone had done a careful job of it, but not a professional one. Home tape, the kind that yellows. I took it back down to the desk. The pocket in the back was the one the cards had come from. I already knew that. What I didn't know, until I opened the book, was that there were things tucked inside it. Not many. 6 pieces of paper, in different sizes, at different points in the book. A folded strip of what looked like grocery receipt paper, torn along one edge. A page from a small pocket notebook. A napkin, thin and gone brittle at the folds. A corner of an envelope. 2 slips of the same cheap yellow notepaper, one darker with age than the other, all handwritten. All green ink, the same green ink from the borrower cards. None of them were letters, none of them were addressed to anyone. I read them in the order I found them, front of the book to the back. The first said, "Started again today, it's raining." The part where she leaves the hotel for the first time is still my favorite. I don't know why. The second on the napkin said, "Mother died on Sunday. I came here to sit for a while. This book always feels like an old room I know." The third from the pocket notebook said, 45 today. Read it on the T. A man tried to talk to me about it. He hadn't read it. He just wanted to talk. The fourth said, "The chapter about the window still gets me. I don't know if I've changed or if it has." The fifth was 2 lines in a shakier version of the same hand. "Very tired lately, but I keep coming back. I don't know what else to do with a Sunday." The sixth was the shortest. It said, "One more time." I sat with the book for a long time. I don't remember exactly what I thought about. The apartment in Jamaica Plain probably. 60 years in one apartment. How she must have walked here, or taken the Orange Line, or gotten a ride from someone when she got too old to walk. Sitting in the reading room, opening the same book, tucking a napkin into a page and forgetting about it. Or maybe not forgetting. Maybe leaving it on purpose for the next time. The notes weren't meant for anyone. Not for me. Not for a niece in New Hampshire. Not for a diary she was going to publish. They were the kind of thing you write to yourself, in the margins of a life, because the thought will otherwise drift off and be lost. She'd been using the book as a place to keep them, a place that was quiet and warm and always where she left it. 57 years is a long time to love something without telling anyone. The rules for the special collection are clear. Any material found inside a book, if it seems to have historical or personal value, should be removed, cataloged separately, and either returned to the family or kept in the archive. That's the protocol. I've done it dozens of times with much less than this. Grocery lists, bookmarks, dry cleaning receipts. All of it goes into a labeled sleeve with a note about which volume it came from. I looked at the 6 pieces of paper on the desk. I put them back where I found them. Same pages, same order. I closed the book, I took it back upstairs and put it on the shelf. I straightened it so it wasn't leaning anymore. Then I went back to the basement, stapled the 3 borrower cards together, and slid them into a manila envelope. I marked the envelope with the call number and put it in the box for cards that don't need to be transferred to the digital system. That box exists. Not every card does. Some of them just get boxed up again and kept, because the branch supervisor is a soft touch about that kind of thing, and I am too. The book is still there. Anyone can request it. It's a public library. If you sit in the reading room and open it, you'll find her notes exactly where she left them. You won't know who she was. You won't know she died in the fall of 2019. You won't know she read the book 57 times, or more, because those are only the times she remembered to stamp the card. I've been back to that shelf twice since. Once to make sure I'd put it back straight. Once, more recently, because I wanted to see if anyone had checked it out. Nobody has. Not yet. The first pallet showed up on a Tuesday around 2 a.m., which is not a strange time for us. Nothing about it looked wrong except the paperwork, and even that took me a while to notice. I dispatch outbound freight for a hub outside Memphis. December is our worst month. Peak season, ice on the ramp, 3 planes in ground hold, drivers screaming into the radio because their loads are late. You learn to work fast and stop asking questions about the small stuff. If a pallet moves, it moves. That night I was covering the intercept desk. Intercept is where we handle freight that gets pulled off the belt for one reason or another. Wrong barcode, damaged wrap, address kickback. It's usually a 5-minute fix. You pull up the tracking, reprint the label, shove it back into the sort. The pallet came off the west belt at 2:14 and I logged it in like any other. Standard wooden skid, shrink wrapped, maybe 40 inches high. On top, there was one small paper tag stapled to the plastic. That was it. No air bill, no shipper, just a tracking number and a delivery address. I ran the number through our system 3 times because I thought I was reading it wrong. 12 digits, right format. But it wasn't in our database. It wasn't in the customers. It wasn't in the backup ledger we keep for the transfers from ground. Nothing. Like the number had been printed on a real label but never assigned. The address was residential, a street in a small town outside Jackson, Tennessee, about 80 miles east of us. That in itself wasn't strange. Residential deliveries come through all the time. I called my lead, Marco. He was in the break room eating cold pizza and told me to just print an intercept label, tag it, and put it in overnight quarantine. Somebody would deal with it on day shift. So I did. Before I stuck it in the cage, I called the phone number listed for the recipient. I don't always do that, but I was curious. It was around 3 in the morning and I figured nobody would answer, and that would be that. Someone picked up on the second ring. I said hello. I told them where I was calling from and asked if they were expecting a delivery. There was silence. Maybe 1 second, maybe 2. Then a soft click, and the line went dead. I stared at the phone for a minute. Then I laughed, because what else are you going to do at 3 in the morning? Wrong number, probably. Old listing. Whoever answered thought I was a scammer. I forgot about it by the end of my shift. The next night, the same pallet came off the belt. I want to be clear about that. Not a similar pallet, the same one. Same shrink wrap with the same crease down the side. Same paper tag stapled in the same spot. Same 12-digit tracking number. The intercept label I had printed the night before was gone. Peeled off, clean, no residue. I checked the cage first thing when I saw it. My tagged pallet from the previous night was still sitting there, wrapped in yellow tape, untouched. So this was a second one. A copy. I checked the number again. Still not in any system. Address still the same Jackson address. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I called the number again, because part of me needed to confirm the first call actually happened. 2 rings. Someone picked up. I didn't say anything this time. I just listened. I could hear the room they were in. Not breathing, not really, but a kind of small movement, a shift of weight, something soft, like a coat sleeve dragging across a receiver. Then the click. I hung up and just sat there. Marco was on a smoke break outside. The floor was loud with the belt and the shouting. I felt very still inside of it. By Friday, I had 4 pallets in the cage, everyone identical. Everyone showed up between 2 o'clock and 2:20 in the morning. Off the west belt, no air bill, 1 paper tag, same number, same address. I stopped calling the phone after the 3rd night. I couldn't tell you why exactly. It just felt like I shouldn't. I brought it up to Marco on Friday morning and he was annoyed. Not at me. He hates paperwork more than anyone I know. He said just leave them in the cage, day shift can deal with it, don't waste your time. He also said, and I remember this because it stuck with me, he said some of these little shipper accounts get glitchy this time of year and don't lose sleep over it. I didn't tell him I had called the number. I don't know why I didn't. I looked up the address on my phone in the parking lot before I drove home. Google Maps showed a house. Small one-story, brick, chain-link fence, a driveway that ended in dead grass. The street view photo was from 2016. That was as recent as it got. I thought that was strange, but I was tired. The pallets kept coming. Saturday, Sunday, Monday, 7 in the cage. My yellow tape was starting to look like a joke, one long piece of tape after another, the cage getting fuller each night with things that shouldn't have existed twice, let alone 7 times. I started coming in early to watch the West Belt. I wanted to see the pallet arrive, which container it came out of, which ULD, which flight. On Sunday night, I stood there for 2 hours, from midnight to 2 o'clock, watching every skid come down. At 2:11, I turned around to grab a coffee. When I turned back, the pallet was on the floor at the end of the belt. Nobody had wheeled it over, nobody had touched it. It was just there, wrapped and tagged. I asked the 2 guys working the belt if they had seen anyone drop it. They both said no. One of them shrugged and said maybe it came off while I was looking away. He didn't sound sure. He didn't sound unsure either. He just wanted to keep working. I put it in the cage. Monday night, I called out sick. I sat at my kitchen table until 3 a.m. staring at my phone. I didn't call the number. I wanted to, and I didn't. Tuesday, I went back in. The cage had a new pallet in it, number 8. That was when I decided to open one. I picked the freshest one, the one from Tuesday. I cut the shrink wrap with my box knife and peeled it back. Underneath was what looked like a normal stack of shipping cartons, 6 of them, plain brown corrugated standard size, taped along the seams with clear packing tape. No labels, no markings, not even a manufacturer's stamp on the cardboard, which I have honestly never seen. I cut the tape on the top box. It was empty. Not empty like packing peanuts had shifted, not empty like the item was small, empty like a brand new box you'd pull off a shelf at a store, clean inside, smelling faintly of cardboard and nothing else. I opened the next one, empty, and the next, and the next. 6 sealed boxes, all empty, all sealed the same way. I stood there in the cage with my knife in my hand and I felt something I still don't have a good word for. It wasn't fear exactly. It was closer to the way you feel when you realize you've been talking to somebody for 10 minutes and they haven't been listening at all. I retaped the boxes as best I could, rewrapped the pallet, put it back in the cage. Then I went to my desk and pulled up the address one more time. I wanted the property tax records this time, not Google. Our system has a link to a public records tool we use for verifying business addresses. The house at that address in Jackson had been condemned in 2016 and demolished in the summer of 2017. Parcel had been sitting as an empty lot since then. No new construction, no new owner. The tax roll just listed it as vacant land. I looked at the phone number on the tag. I looked at my desk phone. I did not call it. That was the last pallet. Wednesday night, nothing came off the West Belt with that number on it. Thursday, nothing. Friday, nothing. By the end of the week, the cage was still full of my 8 pallets, and Day Shift finally noticed and asked me what the hell they were. I told them I didn't know. Marco signed off on scrapping them. They went into the compactor on Saturday morning. I watched. I never filed a report. I know I should have. There's a form for anomalous freight, and I've filled it out plenty of times for less. But I didn't write it up. I don't have a clean reason. I just didn't want anybody else calling that number. I wrote it all down in a small notebook I keep in my glove box, dates and times and the tracking number and the address, and I put the notebook under the spare tire in my trunk. It's still there. I check on it sometimes when I'm cleaning out the car. I don't read it, I just make sure it's where I left it. The only thing I never wrote down was what I heard on the second call, that soft movement in the room, because if I write it down, I'll have to decide what it was, and I don't want to.
Alright, that wraps this one up. Thanks for watching, and let me know in the comments which 4chan story you enjoyed the most. Don't forget to take a look at the other videos on the channel for more creepy late night material. See you soon. Bye.